We have reached the final week of our series in the Gospel of John called Signs of Life. The sign we'll be exploring this week, the climactic sign that all the other signs have been preparing us for, is resurrection. Specifically, the resurrection of Jesus' friend Lazarus, which takes place in John chapter 11. And John 11 takes place at a critical point in the Gospel. The story is moving toward its climax. The next chapter begins Holy Week, which ends with Jesus' own crucifixion and resurrection. John 11 is actually moving us toward Jerusalem. This sign takes place in the town of Bethany, and from there it's only a short walk to Jerusalem. You may remember that the first sign that John identified as performed by Jesus took place all the way back in chapter 2, when Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding. And now Jesus performs his last sign at a funeral. It is important to see this story not just in the context of the Gospel of John, but the entire Bible. All the way back in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis 3, death entered the world through the disobedience of Adam and Eve. Death has become a reality in our world as a result of sin, of human rebellion against God. Because we decided we'd rather do things our way than trust Him and His wisdom. One of the key questions that runs through the biblical story is, what is God going to do about death? We know it wasn't meant to be part of our experience, but now that it is a reality, what is God going to do about it? We get glimpses throughout the Old Testament that God will one day reverse death. And then in John chapter 11, we get something more concrete. Jesus calls Lazarus out of the grave, and his dead friend comes back to life. It's a sign that Jesus has the power to conquer death. But of course, Lazarus would eventually die again later. The reversal of death in John 11 is only temporary. But don't miss the final scene in chapter 11. The resurrection of Lazarus rallies the religious leaders in their opposition to Jesus. They decide that Jesus needs to die before he builds enough of a following to bring down consequences from the Romans. It sets in motion the plot that will result in Jesus' crucifixion and the ultimate defeat of death when Jesus himself rose from the dead on Resurrection Sunday. In 1 Corinthians 15, the Apostle Paul reminds us that bodily resurrection isn't just for Jesus. Followers of Jesus also have the hope of bodily resurrection in the future when death is conquered forever. Paul quotes the prophet Isaiah saying that death will be swallowed up in victory, and he mocks death in the words of Hosea. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? And I'll close today with a few questions to reflect on. I want you to notice that Jesus' reaction when he is brought to his friend's graveside in verses 33 to 38. He's described as deeply moved and greatly troubled, and he even pauses to weep before performing the sign. Why do you think Jesus weeps? How does that scene strike you, especially as you consider the loved ones in your life who are no longer alive? And finally, how does the future of bodily resurrection bring comfort to you this week? Blessings to you as you reflect on this beautiful passage this week. We'll see you on Sunday.